Hello, sir.
Hello, Aditya.
Sir, for somebody whose life is shaped by the emergency, and then the whole people's movement, the Lok Satta movement, somebody who has interacted with people on a level that is unprecedented. Today, as we are speaking, thousands of the youth of the country are on the streets of Delhi asking for something that, in my opinion, they deserve, which is a better life. We can talk about is it right, is it wrong, the way they are doing it. But is it not an undeniable fact that the youth of this country deserve what they are asking for?
Aditya, unquestionably, there is now a serious schism in the country. About 20% of Indian young people who had the privilege of getting relatively decent schooling, good quality education and skills, a bit of a capital, and in many cases, metropolitan living, urban metropolitan living, with middle class parentage, with the benefits of education and some economic stability. They have all the possibilities in the future. In a country growing at 7-8% per annum on a consistent basis, hopefully that growth will continue for the next 20-30 years. That's our expectation and hope. With technology giving us so many opportunities, with they acquiring the skills which give them the confidence and the productivity to be economic players in the future of the country, life is of one kind. But the bulk of the young people, for no fault of theirs, merely because of the accident of birth in many cases, while they have on paper certificates and degrees, they have really no usable skills or educational foundations. The parents are sacrificing a great deal. The youngsters have worked hard within the system. They did what they were asked. And they acquired the degrees and certificates. And yet, a stable future is eluding them. So there's a clash between ambition and ability, for no fault of theirs. This is a monumental challenge. This is not one day's challenge. This is not about party politics or polemics or political tactics or polarization. It's in my view, it is the greatest challenge in the world today, because no country faces the magnitude of demographic crisis as India does. That 85% plus people in the working population of India, that they all are in the unorganized sector, most of them without any secure monthly wage, with paltry incomes, uncertain incomes, leading precarious lives and livelihoods. And how to formalize them, how to bring them into the organized sector, give them some element of job security and dignity, and a roadmap to future prosperity. Now, poverty is not a curse. Hopelessness is a curse. People are willing to endure poverty, work hard, and be patient, provided there is a clear and viable roadmap that they can see. Provided they know that they're going to be partners in economic activity and their future will be better. Now, while economic growth is touching everybody in some form, like mobile phones reached everywhere, like UPI now everybody is using it, all kinds of stories. But in terms of prosperity touching them in the long term, in terms of their reaching a middle class status, their children enjoying the dignity and opportunity that they aspire for, that hope is not there for the bulk of the people. So I would urge everybody to look beyond party politics and beyond polarization, beyond polemics and political tactics. If you do it as merely a news cycle problem, and once the parliament session is over, and newspapers get tired of it, some other issue will engage attention, therefore it will be over. It may be over in terms of the news coverage, but I think we must recognize that there is a deep-seated malaise in the economic management of the country for 75 years, for 40 and odd years before economic reform, and post-reform also, while some things have significantly improved, the inclusion for the 80% or 75% people is simply not there. And it's not one government's fault, it's not one party's fault, it's not one day's fault, it's not merely union, it's actually states, perhaps even more than union. It's a monumental challenge before the nation, and I hope we'll address it as such. Otherwise, it's only a political tactics, a law and order problem on one side, and an opportunity to embarrass the government on the other side, it will be a tragedy of great dimension for the country.
So now you spoke about addressing this humongous challenge. So do you think part of that is also the ability for the government to dehyphenate credible dissent from the non-credible? In this case, when the lines could really be blurred, do you think the government erred there?
Let me put it this way. Government could and should do more. The latest news indicates that no, Union Minister met him twice, I think, and the Home Minister also is sending olive branch, and there is some effort to engage. It's not merely about political tactics and managing the parliamentary or public opinion. It's a long-term thing. So a government that is completely disconnected from angst of this kind, irrespective of its manifestations and expression, that's not important. Is it Cockroach Janata Party or is it a particular demand? This is not important. There is a deep-seated underlying challenge of India. It's a challenge confronting all the young people of the country. No, it's a bit like, I'm a medical doctor by training, so sometimes I go into medical examples. You may be having a deep-seated malignancy, but what you see may be an ulcer outside. Treating an ulcer or a band-aid is not a solution. You have to actually address the problem. Sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes it may be even a little intractable. And definitely it's a long-term thing. But we have to address it. We can't simply postpone it. See, there are three numbers which I sometimes keep reminding the people of. 85% people in the unorganized sector in G20 countries or major economies, no other country has so little formalization and so much of informality in work. That means precarious livelihoods by definition. Insecure jobs, no monthly secure job, and relatively low wages and productivity. Only 40% urbanization. We are claiming that we are urbanizing very fast, but India has the lowest level of urbanization in modern world among large economies by a wide margin. And in today's world, urbanization equals modernization equals prosperity equals wealth creation. You cannot delink them. Urban areas have their challenges, but without urbanization, there's no way you can really modernize and give prosperity and opportunity. The third is 46%. Numbers keep varying, sometimes 41, sometimes 42, but over 40% still dependent almost entirely on agriculture. These three, any one number should be making us very uneasy. All three numbers should make us not sleep at all. Those who are entrusted with the responsibility of the future of this country at the state level, national level, political parties, opposition, media, all of us cannot afford to even sleep until we figure out a roadmap and carry the people with us, urge patience with credible roadmap and assurance, and give them the tasks that are within their reach, how to employ, create the skills for themselves, how to be thrifty, government becoming fiscally responsible, but most of all, doing whatever it takes to promote inclusive economic growth. And all this is a monumental exercise that will take probably next decade or more. So there's no question. This is an incredible challenge, and it has to be treated as such.
So you spoke about these three figures. Now, if the government does not address it in the even medium term, let's say, what do you think could be the ramifications in our society and polity?
Now, when there are deep-seated structural problems in any economy, the society must be able to find the leadership, intellectual, moral, political, to be able to persuade people to change course and to translate ideas into action. If it doesn't happen, the countries pay a heavy price. Look at Britain, the country that colonized us at one time, world superpower before America became a superpower, the world's most important country for a long, long time. They have now the 7th Prime Minister in 10 years, not because Prime Ministers were individually bad or anything. It's just that out of desperation, they think that I throw out this fellow, somebody will come, I throw out that fellow, somebody will come. Nothing is going to change because they are not willing to address the structural problems. Their problems are different. A demographic transition, where too many people are dependent on welfare and too few are paying taxes. Welfare system gone out of control. And of course, the other demographic challenge of migration and without proper integration, and therefore all kinds of cultural fears of assimilation and so on and so forth. So together, They're creating an enormous problem. Now, there are no easy solutions. You can't raise taxes because there are too few people working. You can't reduce welfare easily because far too many people depend on welfare and welfare has gone out of control. So somewhere a social contract is required. Now, similarly for India, we are actually in a better place. First of all, any country that is experiencing about 7-8% economic growth is a lucky country. Many problems can be overcome. Money itself will become an engine to address the challenges. But if we don't take advantage of that opportunity, the breathing room available, because we have reasonable growth and because we have fiscal responsibility in the past 10, 15 years, the COVID crisis we could withstand without too much of economic loss. India is one of the few large economies in the world, maybe the only one, we actually took care of the necessity in the short term without undermining the fiscal stability. Though we went for 9.2% or so fiscal deficit, it was transient and quickly we could recover from that. The current Middle East crisis, the Iran war crisis, India is the only country which is able to deploy significant resources without too much difficulty because we're past fiscal probity. And for a considerable period of time, you could actually maintain the low cost of fuel artificially. And even today, fertilizer, we give 90% plus urea subsidy and without too much of stress. So in some ways, growth and fiscal stability give us a lot of opportunity. If we don't use that opportunity wisely, anticipate the challenges of the next 15, 20 years. It's not 1 year, 2 years. It's not 1 million term. 15, 20 years may be a generational challenge. Now, but I know it means a lot of sacrifice. I know it means investing a lot of political capital in this, creating this roadmap. But that's necessary. If the country does not find those resources, those intellectual, moral, and political resources, we'll pay heavy price in terms of A, economic growth itself will stop. B, the anger and the angst of the youth cannot be contained beyond a point. It will spill over onto the street. Yes, it is wrong to protest violently. In a constitutional democracy, there is no place for violence. There is no place for emotional blackmail. There is no place for fast and to death. There is no place for Rasta Roko. All this is true. Dr. Ambedkar said it on 26 November 1949, on the day Constitution was approved, as opposed to promulgated 2 months later. He said clearly, once we have constitutional freedoms, and once we have the right to self-governance through the vote, we have to forfeit the reckless forms of protest earlier that we indulged in. Now, the obstructionist, sometimes violent, Quit India movement saw 10,000 deaths. Vast public property being destroyed, thinking that we're destroying British property. It's our property, our railway stations, our roads, our whatever. So that was, however unfortunate it was, one can understand that because you were subjects. You were subjugated. You had no freedoms. You had no self-governance. But Dr. Ambedkar quite rightly urged us, once we have constitutional freedoms and electoral democracy, our protests, while we have the constitutional right to protest, they have to be peaceful, non-obstructive in every which way. And you have to respect the constitutional process. That is this side. But the other side is, when the systemic crisis is so grave, affecting a significant section of the population for no fault of theirs, because of the past sins for 7 decades, we have an obligation to give a clear roadmap and to change course to the extent required. What is the difficulty in doing whatever it takes to improve the educational skills, even at this late hour? We are all indulging in perfunctory statements. And some dusty document somewhere in government offices contain this and that. I was in China some 20 years ago, along with a group of eminent citizens. Chinese admired higher education in India, because they were all influenced by the brand image of IITs and IIMs. Obviously, we would remain silent when on foreign soil they praise us, even if our shortcomings, it's not my place to correct them. But they were really feeling sorry about their own higher education. In these 20 years, they corrected it remarkably. Chinese higher education is now second only to the United States. Chinese school education is second to none. So you can do it, but you must have determination, a sense of urgency, and a war footing, skills and education, small town development, and the states where the fiscus are going out of control, fiscal responsibility to protect the future, and a modicum of rule of law to promote investment. The economic policies and infrastructure I think the current government can be given reasonable credit. Unquestioned infrastructure, they're doing very well. Fiscal responsibility, the marks are very high. Economic management, you can have some disputes here and there, but on the whole, it's growth promoting, investment promoting, economic management. But the rest of it is equally important in a country as poor as India, as complex and diverse as India. When 90% or 85% are in the unorganized sector, they have dreams, but they have no opportunity. There's nothing more dangerous than ambition without the opportunity.
So, you talked about the anger and the angst of the youth, right? For the last 20 odd days, this protest was happening. The government did not open a dialogue channel with them. The government today, when they went on, say, the Sansad Chalo march, whatever, walking to the Sansad, the government reacted in a way where they wanted to repress them. They used violence from both sides. We're not getting into that. But the fact that there was violence on streets, the government did not have any room for dialogue. Now, when you do that, whatever marks we want to give the government on how they are managing the macroeconomic status of the country, the point of the matter is, we end up doing these sorts of fast and to deaths or coming on the streets is because the government is not listening to us. How do you make the government listen?
It's chicken or egg. Those in power, states at national level, this party, that party, not much of a difference. It's only the question of who is in power. Their concern is, if you yield an inch, they ask for a mile. Because demands are often reckless, unsustainable, unrealistic. And people in the large party, when they know it's not realistic, they remain silent. So when there are concentrated benefits and distributed costs, everybody is silent. If a group of employees say, we want this, if the rest of the people remain silent, the government, the state or national level has the problem of dealing with that politically. Similarly, if there is an ulcer, which is merely a symptom, but there's a deep-rooted malady, without addressing the larger causes and urging for a change in policy or change in course with the roadmap, if you simply ask for short-term, instant things, it will be seen as a political posturing. So the parties in power in the country, across the country, at all levels, they're always worried. What exactly do we do to contain this? Not to allow it to spill over and to become bigger and bigger. If you ignore too much, the festering sore may create problems. If you give too much attention, a non-issue may become an issue. So my appeal is, ignore the temporary political issues in the news cycle. How to manage parliament this week, those in opposition and ruling party. If there is an underlying deeper issue, even if the agitators are not capable of articulating it, it is the leadership's responsibility in the country, whether it's media or the economists or the political leadership, to understand what are underlying causes and the potential consequences in the long term, and then come out to the country laying a roadmap. I think the failure is really that. It's not tactical failure. Whether we open a dialogue or not, certainly. In a democratic society, wisdom demands, and I think they're now opening up a dialogue. But these are still palliators. The real answer is, are you willing to restructure the economy in a manner that it becomes more and more inclusive, in a very visible manner, in a credible manner? Are you going to sustain that course in a fiscally responsible way? Are you going to give hope to the masses that there's a better future that awaits them, even if instant nirvana is not possible? There, I think our system is floundering. I really find fault with all of us together. It's not merely those in power. All of us belong to the elites of this country. All of us are the establishment. Let's not pretend otherwise. No, in this country there is a fashion that if I am not the prime minister, then I am the rank opposition. No. You don't have to be prime minister or a minister or MLA or MP. We are all the establishment. The people who matter, who have voice. We are all abdicating all too readily and blaming somebody else. So it's a much deeper issue. But certainly I would urge government not to allow things to go out of control. And in a democratic society, as in a different context, Amartya Sen said, any government will respond sensitively. They may appear to be a little tough initially, but because in a democracy and our own country's sentiments, take the farmers' agitation. The farmers were completely wrong on their agitation because all the 3 laws proposed were very good for farm sector. I keep repeating ad nauseam. But government was very restrained and finally withdrew them to the detriment of farm sector. So governments in India cannot be faulted for being too tough. They should be faulted for being too soft, too scared of electoral consequences. So that's not the real problem. The real problem is, Are we looking at the long-term consequences? Otherwise, what will happen is this anger and angst cannot be contained. That restiveness will lead to violence and a bit of anarchy. Then what will happen is the people who want economic growth and stability in society, the elites of India in every sector, not merely those in power, they will themselves demand that order must be restored at any cost for economic growth. So by invitation, there will be repression. You can clearly see that. In a country with mass poverty, with unfulfilled expectations, when the growth model is doing something good but not enough people don't feel included, and with all kinds of freedoms and freedom sometimes expressed as license and behavior, easily it can lead to violence and anarchy. Some people will obviously be willing to promote within the country or outside, and it leads to a legitimation of repression. That's not the way we should go for. We should actually look at the problems today and find answers. And again, let me reiterate, because our growth is reasonably sound, because there's immense potential to grow, that gives us a lot of elbow room. There's a stable government, there's a growth momentum in the country, there are some good things going in our favor. Even Iran war can be used as an opportunity because technology now gives us an opportunity to become energy independent. So let's now address this challenge as fundamental as like infrastructure building. A lot of attention is being paid. And absolutely full marks to those who are doing it. Growth promotion in a variety of ways, investment promotion or fiscal management, full marks. This is as important, if not more important. You must make it as a central issue of Indian polity, Indian policy, and Indian execution in the next 15, 20 years. That is where I think we should focus on.
So you spoke about now elite consensus, which we often discuss. But now, sir, there's another element that you often bring in, and that is societal controls. Now, what is the role that they play in a movement such as the one we're seeing in Delhi right now?
You see, Indian people are remarkably resilient. Our families absorb a lot of stresses and strains. But what's happening is two things. One, the social controls are weakening because of increasing urbanization, nuclearization of families, and enormous exposure, overload of information, global communications and social media. The family's ability to urge caution and to embrace the children and then give them some sense of hope. All right, no, my family will take care of me even if there is a problem outside. That is only going to diminish. That is one problem. The second problem is, if you take in terms of careers and education, even lower middle class families, the abject poor may not be able to invest that much. Even lower middle class families are investing a lot of money for their children's education without getting education. Private schools, and then all kinds of coaching institutions for admission to university courses or post-degree government jobs, some coaching, in the hope that somehow they'll settle down. And we have not culturally created a framework, an acceptable framework in which at the age of 16, 17, the children start working at least part-time and then understand how the economy works, but they will get a livelihood only when they provide a service or goods to people. We somehow think that the job is a babu's job. You go and take a coaching thing, that's this or that's all kinds of coaching institutions are there, they're mushrooming, and you somehow struggle very hard, spend years and years, you think you've sacrificed a great deal, you're entitled to a babu's job without any accountability or any delivery. That's not sustainable at the cost of the rest of society. And we have not really educated our families and our children that the economy survives only when you produce something of value to others. They convert that value into an income to you, and you convert your work and your sweat and blood into a product that is of value to them. We have forgotten this basic equation. We are in a political culture where we pretend that there is a solution outside of creation of goods and services. So every political party before the elections, what are the promises they're making? If we are elected, there will be mega DSC, there will be job calendar, there will be recruitment in government, there will be this, there will be that. It's a lie. It's an absolute unvarnished lie. When for railway recruitment at the lower level, the advertisements issued, I'm told 30 million people, 3 crore people applied. In no country on earth can ever that be even contemplated. It's a world record by a zillion miles. Nobody will ever match it except us again, if at all. This is ridiculous. This is impossible. If God comes, and I say this with all emphasis at my command, if Lord God himself comes, whatever your faith, whatever your religion, there is nothing God can do to create employment of the kind they seek for the people of this country. Employment comes only from productivity of goods and services that people need. Employment is not being a clerk in government and then lording over people, getting abnormal wages above the market, producing very little in return, and exploiting the people. That is our culture. Because the colonial hangover of government being everything, we have not yet gotten rid of it. Some of political parties, instead of making people realize the economic truth, the economic logic, have actually aggravated this problem. Now they have to pay the price. Let them at least now repent and tell the truth and start the process.
So you mentioned about government jobs and how they're not the solution, but that is a solution that people are looking for. A. B, you mentioned about 3 figures that should not allow any Indian to speak at this point in time. Both of these things are known to people in power. They're known to the elite class like us, right? We are the administration, like you said. We know these figures. Nothing then seems to happen. We have, for example, I'll give you another sort of way to look at it. The Mandal protest started, again a student protest it was, right? India has seen the student uprisings time and again. Nothing seems to happen. Be in such a scenario, if there is abject hopelessness, like you said, there is no roadmap. As a young man sitting in India right now, what else do I do if not join that protest?
No, first, things are not that despairing. Economic reform, economic growth, and goods and services reaching on a much larger scale than ever before, better infrastructure have significantly improved things, but not enough. So I would not characterize our whole economic experiment as a failure. It is a partial success. But where we are not succeeding, we are not paying adequate attention. 7-8% growth rate is not a joke. It's very significant. We can do even better. But that gives us a lot of elbow room. So it's not entirely off the thing. But I think the political system where they failed is in not changing the nature of discourse in terms of employment, in terms of livelihoods. We are conditioned by the British Sarkar, the My Bap, where a head constable, a clerk, even a peon in government was a very big fellow. And 90% of the people are inferior to him. There was an asymmetry of power. And instead of addressing the asymmetry of power by our institutional models and economic models, we perpetuated that and gave a false hope that you can be in that power. Now, if everybody in that power, who is that bearing that burden? How are you going to sustain it? It's impossible. It's ridiculous. So that is the problem. It's more a public discourse and creating an illusion of prosperity through government jobs. It's not that the economy completely failed. Now, some things are happening, but happening far too slowly and far too small a scale. We're talking about skill promotion. Yeah. Now we have Skill Development Corporation, UPA government did it, NDA government is doing it, now industrial apprenticeships are there. So on paper, everything is there. No, that's a problem with India. Whatever solution you offer, for instance, I want small town development as a means of economic growth. 40 years ago, Aditya, there was a small and medium towns development program. Nothing new. So they'll say, see, we had the program. It is not a checklist. You must make it central to your policy and execution. The way you are now executing national highways and infrastructure. This can't be just like, no, of course, we also want to build roads. So of course, you want to build roads, but have you built them? And on what scale? Similarly here, the desultory, perfunctory kind of a thing, having a piece of paper, allocating some amount, not enough. This must be one of the central priorities of the country. One of the top priorities of the country economically, administratively, politically, in messaging, in resource allocation, in execution. If that is visible, sometimes we commit mistakes. Doesn't matter. I mean, when you are spending 1,20,000 rupees for school education per year per child, when educations are appallingly bad, Has the system responded so far creatively and constructively fast enough and on a big enough scale? Not at all. For 25 years, our educational outcomes are slipping further, not improving. This is the truth. Now, in today's world, as opposed to, let's say, 15th century world, if you only know how to dig a pit and fill a pit, if you know that at all, even that I suspect our kids don't know because now they are modern, you have no other skills, how can society employ you? Pray tell me. If a doctor comes out with a medical degree, but he is not able to treat patients with confidence after 5.5 years of training, tell me, just because you got a degree, can the society afford to sustain you with a high quality of life? If an engineer simply has a degree, a mechanical engineer has to take a scooter to an illiterate mechanic to get it repaired or to find out what is wrong, but because he has a degree, can the society afford to employ him? That is the plight we are in. We are not confronting it. Either we are too scared, or we are afraid that we will antagonize people, they will get upset, instead of understanding that the best thing is confront it in an honest way. Yes, you require some about tact, you require to combine that with a sense of hope, you must do some things, but address it. Untruth is not the answer. Face the challenges. Whether it is a Edward Heath in Britain after the Second World War, or Margaret Thatcher in the wake of 1970s winter of discontent, or Deng Xiaoping in China after the devastation of Mao Zedong's China, true leadership is understanding the crisis a society is going through, finding a constructive and creative answer, and preparing the people, make it acceptable, and build a roadmap and execute it. So there's no substitute. Or Lee Kuan Yew after 1962. Now, India has such a moment today. We need it.
So my question is a little related to that. Of course, the problem is there. My question is, when there is such apathy from the government, when they're not willing to confront, how do we make sure our voices reach them, if not for these kinds of rasta rokos? Because my question is, we have given you enough time. Even if just take this government, let's take UP, we had given them 10 years. We gave this government a long sort of time to respond to this challenge. They did not. They failed. Now we want them to sort of listen to us. What else can we do?
See, this discussion itself today is symptomatic of our public discourse in the country. I'm trying to make us look at the larger problem beyond party politics, because no government on its own can address this. God himself cannot address it. If God is a male, that is, God herself, or God themselves cannot address it. But we are so steeped in party politics, polarized politics. Politics as a power game as to who is there rather than what happens, that even you and I sitting in FDR are not able to go beyond that confines. We have to change that. We have to change that, because a chief minister or a minister or a prime minister, they don't have a magic wand. And problems of this magnitude, if they ask me, for instance, you tell me what you would do, I don't have instant Nirvana. I have a set of practical solutions based on evidence and logic. And as we implement, there will be challenges, there will be problems. But we have to adhere, we have to learn from the experiences, and we have to improve. That is the magnitude of the challenge. So the governments probably are terrified of the magnitude. As long as you can get away with not addressing the fundamental challenges, go into the symptoms, manage with band-aids for the time being, overcome the news cycle and the parliamentary session, okay, for today we survive kind of thing. But what I'm urging is for all political parties, those in power to somehow think it's a temporary news cycle problem, for those in opposition to somehow think it's an opportunity to needle the government, rather than take it as a fundamental structural challenge of India's society and politics. We have a problem. If you reduce everything to power game and voting and elections, I think the country will be very poorly served.
So, but what do citizens do is my question. Of course.
What we are doing. Honestly engage. Be a part of the solution in propagating it and implementing it. For instance, a lot of FDR's work is what actually our basic concern is political and governance reforms. But in practical terms, a lot of our time is about educational outcomes, particularly at school level. Why? Because we understood this problem in the past several years. We also saw the opportunity because economic growth gives us a window. of opportunity. And if inclusive growth is facilitated by small town development and skill promotion and removing the barriers to economic management, no. People like Manish Sabrawal talk about regulatory cholesterol. Even today, if you want to start an enterprise, you're a sinner. You're better off if you simply buy a property in a growing city and then sit back and protect your property and sit back. So there are issues. Many wise people have been talking about that. We're not addressing them adequately. So there is no one instant step. School education, small town development, entrepreneurial promotion, particularly small scale, labor intensive. Labor law, some effort is being made, but we're still halfway there. We touch it, we go back on that. Special economic zones. 50 years ago, we started them. China embarked on it much later. They made it the central piece of their economic strategy. They became where they are, what they are today because of that. We still talk about special economic zones. So a sense of urgency, scale, and not merely a perfunctory response, but real effective implementation.
So now, but in the age of social media, sir, so of course the government needs to be doing what they have to do, but they also need to be seen to be doing what they're doing. So now and you also mentioned that now in such a situation, there are two ways. Now, either you go the route of anarchy, where you let citizens do what they want, or the government comes down on the
governments. It's not one government in India.
Yeah, the governments come down heavily. Now, in a social media led world, how do you manage that? How do you make sure that you don't go either way?
I wish I had an answer. Actually, I'm right now going through a book on this subject. I think it's a monumental global challenge, well above my pay grade. I only understand the challenge because, see, earlier there was breathing room. You could hear, you could discuss, you could understand, you could pause, you can reflect, you could actually come out with a realistic solution. If it doesn't work, you could resile a little bit and then modify it. Today, instant nirvana. Your attention span is limited, you want instant answers. Whether the wisest person or the most ignorant person has the same access to the megaphones. But we must never confuse between access and wisdom. Whether everybody may have access, but Einstein is an Einstein, an idiot is an idiot. Social media does not distinguish that, unfortunately. So we have a fundamental challenge. That's a much bigger challenge than I can contemplate at this point of time. I'm sure those in political parties are smarter because at least for their political purposes, they're creating a social media machine to counter, to put across their point of view. So I really have no answers. I understand the fundamental problem is there. Now, where it's going to take democratic societies, I do not know. As an optimist, I hope that somehow human society will be able to deal with that. But I think we must not underestimate the political party's instinct for survival. And therefore, they know how to utilize social media for their purposes also. But it's a bigger challenge, I agree with you. And that only means even greater credibility on the part of the leadership. Even greater visibility in terms of a credible roadmap that makes an obvious difference so that you can counter the untruth or the anger or the emotion with actual facts on ground. Today, for instance, when the government says we're building 30 to 34 kilometers of national highway per day, it's a very powerful argument. Even if some people question it, on the whole, nobody disputes the government's ability to execute the infrastructure programs. So, unless you acquire the same ability in terms of inclusive economic growth, namely school education, skills, small town development, fiscal management, better investment promotion, and regulatory cholesterol being removed, at least minimal rule of law framework, and unless you give that confidence to people, you cannot really tell a story. You're able to tell a story about your infrastructure. You're not able to tell a story about inclusive growth. That's what I'm urging. Just as you put enormous emphasis rightly on infrastructure, please put equal emphasis on inclusive growth and come to a stage when you can actually tell a story based on real accomplishment. Then I think we can contain this and channelize this constructively. Otherwise, there's a potential schism. It's not going to end well for the country.
And do you think that this is the story that will give millions the hope for a decent life?
Absolutely. You must trust the people's wisdom. You must trust the people's common sense. They may not be very learned. They may not have degrees. But even ordinary citizens, they have intuitive sense of what is working, what is not working. You must trust them. If you mistrust people, you want a short-term thing, that's the biggest problem of the opposition. They're offering short-term individual welfare because they believe people are unsmart, let me put it very kindly, that people will fall for short-term inducements, and therefore that's a ticket to power. That's not working out very well, is it? You require welfare, but people actually are looking for long-term growth. People are looking for their families to be better off, not depend on somebody for largesse. So don't underestimate the people's capacity. Yes, there may be desperation, but people have intuition. They understand what really works for their families, because Indian culture is about taking care of our children and their future.
So, sir, you often quote Reverend Carter, what he had said to you. Politics is the solution towards the problem. In America is, whereas politics looks like the central problem in India. With our conversation, I make that's what I get out of it, right? The politicians there's a vacuum in leadership as well. Nobody's willing to confront that. In that scenario, if politics, if we have to, like youth, like young people like Akshat and I, if we have to make politics the solution, right? We are willing to take that battle on. How do we make politics a solution in a country like India?
You must take it two different baskets. That comment of Reverend Carter 20 years ago or so, when we were discussing, was in the context of India's overarching governance and political reforms. Political parties, from autocracy to democracy and people's participation. An electoral system from money power and pedigree and caste and all kinds of evil practices to a rational political choice. A decentralization of power in place of the high degree of centralization in this country. And centralization is not at the union level. Let me reiterate, it's at the state level primarily now. India has moved from 1970s. And local governments are the weakest in India among any large countries in the world. And a framework of rule of law, not merely normatively, but really effective. So that is the context in which politics, which ought to be the solution, has become the problem. So it is a vexatious problem. Now, the challenges we discussed today, luckily, they don't have to wait for this grand political and governance transformation. Just like economic growth project, economic liberalization project, infrastructure project, they're all happening even in the framework of really, really wrong politics and governance. I cannot overemphasize this. This also can be addressed without even waiting for that. It can't be chicken or egg. If for everything you say, until Indians' democracy is transformed, until honest people without spending excessive money or distributing money or largesse can get elected, until political parties become democratic and wonderful, until power is truly decentralized and made accountable at every level, until rule of law is perfectly in place like, in very mature democracies, then nothing will happen. It's not all or none. So economic growth and inclusive growth are possible even if you're not able to address them immediately, because the fundamental political challenges take time. I dreamt that India will see all those wonderful changes in 5 years' time, because I'm more influenced by science and technology, rational approach. I forgot that human beings are not always rational collectively. Individually, some people may be. Ultimately, societies take time. Technology changes fast and brings about changes very fast. But political and governance systems take time anywhere in the world. It's not a surprise. So perhaps my exuberance was a little excessive. I'm optimistic, but I take a long-term view. But that we do not wait for that in order to engineer economic growth which is inclusive. This must still happen. There's no question about it. Because if we wait for that, then probably we'll have to pick up the pieces as a country.
So, just like a follow-up, I know I said this was the last question, but even for economic growth to happen, it has to happen through political means. Like parties have to raise this issue, political parties have to pick this up, voters have to understand that importance. How do we do that? Of course, one way is discourse like this.
See, a country that has seen impressive unanimity or consensus on economic reform, Narasimha Rao Manmohan Singh's time, of course, because of compulsion, not conviction, agreed. Nevertheless, India was the only major democracy where a 180-degree course correction was possible without significant political or public resistance. So we proved something was possible, right? Similarly, we were able to achieve economic growth despite all the humongous problems we see all around. 7-8% economic growth on a sustained basis, well, we can achieve more. It's not something to be dismissive about. Infrastructure, earlier a national highway is unthinkable. 30 kilometers, 34 kilometers a day. Full electrification of all rail lines. And you can go on and on. So, that means our system still has the strength. I'm not saying it's a uniform strength to do wonderful things everywhere. But even if there are some dark spots, we can do it. We have demonstrated ability. Extend it to this because this is a very fundamental challenge to both our economic growth, continuity of economic growth, and the social stability, and therefore, eventually our political order.